Good evening, friends. This happens to be the second talk in the series of talks being given by the eminent theatre person, Mr. Sudipta Bhawmik. And today's focus is going to be on the Indian theatre tradition. And today's talk, which is a fairly brief talk, is going to be the first part of it and will be followed by the second part the next weekend. But before we begin the talk, I would like to briefly introduce Mr. Bhawmik. Although we have already done that before, but for the benefit of people who were not there during the first talk, here is a brief introduction. Mr. Sudipta Bhawmik is an award-winning actor, director, and playwright who has been performing in the tri-state area stages since 1989. He has acted in and directed several plays in Bengali and in English, and has won several awards at different festivals in India as well as in the US and Canada. He received training in acting and directing at the Panchambed Charyashram, a theatre school in Kolkata, India, and has trained with eminent theatre persons like Sambhu Mitra, Tripta Mitra, Sauli Mitra, Mohit Chatterjee, and others, and also has received training from the famous playwright and director Badal Sarkar at many of his workshops. Mr. Bhawmik is an actor who has played the principal character role in Meera Nayar's film The Namesake as well. He has multiple interests. He's a published cartoonist, a book illustrator, a regular blogger. His blog ninjbengali.com is a very popular read among Bengali netizens around the world. Mr. Bhawmik is very much an IITian, IIT KGPN, a semiconductor design engineer by profession, and has a PhD degree and MTech degree and BTech degree, all awarded from IIT Kharagpur, India. He also has several patents, publications, and awards to his credit. So before we start this presentation about the Indian theatre, I would like to briefly say that the theatre of India has, like many other traditions, deeply embedded within it rituals, the classical components, the devotional components, and the folk components. And for a modern playwright, it's a really exciting endeavor to delve into these traditions and integrate many of them into his or her work. Mr. Bhawmik's talk would be focusing on this basic background, the rich history of performance, tracing it back to the Vedic tradition and to the Vedantic tradition, especially the Upanishads, where many stories and dialects are to be found, and most famously that of Nachiketa, the Mahabharata narratives, and of course, give you a brief overview of the Natya Shastra, which is the most seminal text which talks about Indian theatre tradition way back, more than 2000 years back. However, after this brief overview of his talk and introduction, I would look forward to your interest in this very exciting talk by Mr. Bhawmik. So over to Mr. Bhawmik for his talk. Thank you.
Hello friends, welcome again to a talk on Theatre of India. I hope you have all listened to the first one and liked it. So this is just the second part of the same series. Last time I talked about the origins of Indian theatre, going back to the Vedas period and all, and I'd introduced the singular most important text of Indian theatre, and that is the Natya Shastra. We talked about the origins of Natya Shastra, how it came about the story that's being told about how Brahma created the Natya Shastra, which is also known as the fifth Veda or the Pancham Veda. So today we are going to talk about a little bit more details of it. Now, first some disclosures and disclaimers. Natya Shastra is a huge volume, huge document, okay? To go through it, to understand it, and it's an ancient document, is a very, very challenging task. And there are experts who have tried to do that. But I have tried to capture as much as I can from my knowledge and from my experience reading multiple books. And I'll give you some references of some of the books that I have gone through, which you may use in later part. Natya Shastra as a document talks about a lot of stuff. Okay, it's even difficult to list them all. It talks about how to design a playhouse, the architecture of it, okay, a theater or an auditorium as we call it. It talks about plays, the structure of play, the structure of drama, of the story, and it instructs playwrights how to write plays. It talks about actors, it talks about acting, it talks about how the formation or the construction of the theater company itself, who should be part of it, how should it be managed, and things like that. It talks about a very important thing of Natya Shastra, which is the rasa and the bhava. We'll talk all about it later on. And it talks about, of course, stagecraft. It talks about the props, costumes, music, dance, you name it. Anything related to performing arts is covered in the Natya Shastra. Now, we'll go one by one through each of these different aspects as much as I can. I'll try to throw in some pictures of the different stuff, and also if possible some videos. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so let's talk about the playhouse design first. Okay, the architecture of the playhouse. Now, Natya Shastra talks about three styles of playhouses. Okay, it can either be rectangular, or it can be square, or it can be a triangular one. That's a very odd shape, right? Triangular playhouse. I've never seen one in my life yet. But each of them can either be a large one, okay, or a medium one, or a small one, and they're typically multiples of 48 feet. Okay. Now the thing is, the Natya Shastra says that the large ones may be too big for human beings to perform, because it's, the large hall, there were no acoustic microphone systems or other electronic devices to carry your voice. So you have to rely totally on the acoustics of the building, of the playhouse, and on the actor himself. So the Natya Shastra suggests that you better go for the medium and the small one. That is kind of the 96 feet by 48 feet for the rectangular ones, or the 48 by 48 for the square ones, and then kind of the triangular ones with all 48 feet on each side. Now, the acting or the playhouse itself is divided into two parts, equally half. One part is the performance area, that means the place where the actors perform, and the other part is where the audience sits. Now, where the audience sits is called the prekshala. Okay, it's called the prekshagriha, and that's where we get the word prekshagriha. Okay, preksha means to see. Okay, so the audience where they see the performance, that's called the prekshagriha. And the other part is divided again into two equal parts. The one part is the stage, the performing part, which has again two stages. Okay, one is like something like an upstage and downstage, and it's called the ranga shirsha. Okay, that's the upstage part, and then the ranga pitha, which is the downstage part. And behind the acting zone there is a wall with two walls, and behind that wall is the space where actors prepare, which is what we call the dressing room, or or the green room, whatever you call them, where the actors prepare and then they enter the stage through those doors. So that's the typical architecture of a playhouse as prescribed in the Natya Shastra. Now, Natya Shastra talks about also the structure of the house itself. It says that it should be something like a cave, okay, something like a cave form, only to show or demonstrate how to use the acoustics of the playhouse itself in order to carry the voice. So this is indeed something spectacular as far as Natya Shastra is concerned. Of course, Natya Shastra talks about a lot of other stuff related to the playhouse design and the building, the construction, what all pujas and what all worships you have to do, how to construct the different pillars, how to decorate the walls of it, what should be there. A lot of detailed specs or specifications available in the Natya Shastra for the playhouse design, but we are not going into those details. Okay. Now let's talk about the drama, the types of drama, the types of play as prescribed in the Natya Shastra. Now this is really a kind of a lesson, or these instructions are targeted to the producer, to the director, as well as to the playwright himself. Okay. So Natya Shastra talks about 10 kinds of plays or 10 types of drama. First of all, the Nataka, the Prakarana, the Natika, Vyayoga, Bhana, Samavakra, Vithi, Prahasana, Ihamagra, and Dima. Now, I am not going to talk about all of those, okay, but let's touch upon some of those, because it's really interesting how those dramaturgs constructed the play structure in order to please different kind of audience. Okay, so Nataka is the most popular form typically used in the Sanskrit plays and all, but it's kind of a play where its subject is about a well-known story. That means a story, typically a mythology, or about gods and demons, evil, fighting gods, fighting the demons, things like that. Or it can be about a hero or a celebrated person, okay, of an exalted nature, or a royalty, a king, maybe a prince, and they must all have superhuman powers, okay. And the story should include the exploits of the hero, okay, his conquests, his defeating of the asuras, the evil, the demons, and the bad men, and things like that, okay. And of course, it should also talk about his amorous pastimes, about his girlfriends, and throw in few song and dance sequences and stuff like that, okay. And it should have an appropriate number of acts, also known as anka, okay. Each act is an anka, and should always include an introductory scene. And we'll talk about this introductory scene of the Pravesaka when we discuss the Sanskrit plays in our later part of the series. The second form, the Prakarana, is kind of opposite to Nataka. Prakarana, the play, it must be original. I mean, it's not a well-known story. It's not typically a typical mythological story that most people know, okay? And it does not have an exalted hero like the Nataka. It should be typically a common man, like a merchant, priest, soldier. Think of it more like a realistic social drama. The Natika, which is the third form, is kind of a combination of both the Nataka and the Prakarana. The story must be original, but the hero must be a king or a prince. And it should have a lot of music and, affairs of the harem, of his wives or, lovers. and it should have an abundance of female characters. I mean, think of it, maybe a Bollywood film, something like that. But it is a total entertainment package, which is called the Natika. Now, typically we use the term Natika these days to mention about a small plays, but Natya Shastra is not like that. Natika is a combination of Nataka and Prakarana. There's another form called Samavakra. Samavakra, or rather in Samavakra, the subject should contain the exploits of gods and asuras as a hero. Typically, this is something really surprising, an asura as a hero. But yes, that's what Samavakara is about. It should have 3 acts presenting 3 kinds of excitements. Okay, one may be due to a natural phenomena like a storm or a flood or a wildfire or something like that, or large animals like a stampede of elephants, things like that, or an enemy siege, enemy attacking the king's palace or something like that. There should be 3 kinds of deception. One kind of deception is something that is devised or planned, like a conspiracy. And the other part can be just an accidental deceiving, okay, accidental kind of deception. And the third is obviously something like which an enemy plans to deceive the protagonists or whoever, okay. That means deceiving an enemy in the battlefield or in the war, which is always acceptable. Anything is fair in love and war, as they say. And there should be 3 kinds of love. One, the kind of love which is related to duty. You should love your parents, you should love your elders, you should love your children, things like that, which is duty bound. Then there is another kind of love which is for material gain. You need something from the other person, so you show some love. And the third is the pure love due to passion. Okay, so these must be there. So think about it. Such a precise prescription or specification worked out for each type of the play. Prahasana. Prahasana is another form. We are quite familiar with this term Prahasana. There are 2 kinds of Prahasanas. One is the Shuddh or the pure kind of Prahasana, and another is a mixed Prahasana. Now, all these are about comedy or comic or farce kind of a play, okay, where you talk about the comic disputations by the Saiva gurus and the Brahmins. It has ample jokes, humorous remarks, okay, some slangs thrown in only to entertain the people. And one important thing, mostly these are in the local language or the local dialect. Now, when we talk about the Sanskrit drama, we will know that in Sanskrit drama, although the main language of the play is Sanskrit, but that is spoken only by the main characters. The other characters, the smaller characters, commoners and all, they all speak in local dialects, local languages, okay, or what is known as the Prakrit. We'll talk about it when we talk about Sanskrit drama later on. The mixed Prahasana typically contains, servants and courtesans, unchaste women, their immodest appearances, in dresses and costumes to titillate the audience, that kind of thing, and basically to entertain people, okay, and trying to please their basic senses, basic instincts. Now, popular topics of scandals, hypocrisy, and things like that are typically take place in the Prahasana, and this is what has been in modern days we call farce, comedy, and things like that. Okay. There are other forms. One is called bhana, which really has intrigued me. Bhana is essentially a one-person show, a mono act or a solo act, where one person comes on stage and talks about his own experience, just like I'm doing right now, or about somebody else. Whereas Vithi, which is another form, is where two actors come and have a conversation on stage. Okay, so that's what's called Vithi. Vyayoga is another form which is a little bit complex. They say it should be constructed by expert playwrights with one well-known hero, preferably a sage, okay, a muni or a rishi, as its basis, and a small number of female casts. And it should be of 1 day's duration. Something like what we call a one-act play these days, right? That's what I think is about. Now, one thing I do to point out, scholars say that although Natya Shastra talks about all these different kinds or different varieties of drama structures, play structures, Sanskrit plays by the Sanskrit playwrights not necessarily followed them to the T. Okay, so they typically mix different styles from different things and created their own version. We'll talk about that, but nevertheless, this is a significant contribution by Bharata Muni or whoever created the Natya Shastra to instruct about the different kinds of plays, their structure, and the storylines. Now let's talk about the theatre company. As I said earlier, Natya Shastra talks detailed about how a theatre company or a troupe, as we call it these days, should be constructed. Okay, what should be in part of it? So the most important person in a theatre company or a troupe, as suggested by Natya Shastra, is the troupe leader. And he typically performs the role of the stage manager, also known as Sutradhar. So he has a lot of things he has to do. He serves not only as the manager, as I said, but also Sutradhar. That means during the play, during the performance, he appears and he introduces the play and he ties the knot between connects the different sections of the play to explain to the audience what is going on. Because in Sanskrit plays or in the plays in Natya Shastra, actions often don't happen on stage. Okay, for example, a war has happened, so it happens off stage somewhere, or somebody has murdered somebody, or it doesn't happen on stage. So a messenger comes and informs the actors, the characters on stage what's going on. So sometimes people lose track what's happening here. Okay, so the Sutradhar comes and ties them up. He says, okay, here you see, you remember, this is what happened, now this is what's happening due to that. Okay, so he performs the role of that, and he's also the stage manager. He controls the entire show, runs the entire show. He's also the producer. He has to acquire the funding, he selects what plays to be performed, he appoints the playwrights, manages them, tells them what play to write, he hires actors, he does the casting. Okay, he's also the director. He directs the plays. He coaches the actors too. So he is everything in one. And believe me, in Indian theatre, this tradition is kind of still followed. Okay, so there's always, you'll find in theatre troupes in India, there's one person who kind of manages all the affairs, both the artistic affairs of the company as well as the creative components and the administrative or management functions. Okay, so that's the important part of a troupe, theatre troupe. Now there are other members of the troupe on the group. So Of course, there should be actors, there should be playwrights, and there is assistant to the stage manager. Okay, somebody who helps the sutradhar. Sometimes when the sutradhar is ill or something, he performs that role. There should be makeup artists, there should be costume designers and tailors, seamstresses to stitch the costumes and the dresses, build the ornaments and jewelry. Okay, there should be set and property builders who are expert in building the set. Okay, there should be washermen to clean the clothes and everything. There should be musicians and dancers who are expert in music and dance. See, not all actors are musicians or dancers, so they have to have specialists dealing with this kind of thing. So these all together constitute a theatre company as specified in Natya Shastra. Think about Bharata Muni. Remember the first play he performed, after adopting the Natya Shastra, the fifth Veda from Brahma, he used his 100 sons or Shishyas. So that was his theatre troupe, and he was the troupe leader. Now let's talk about the actors. As per the Natya Shastra, both men and women could be actors. Now we know that even a few years back, women were not allowed to perform on stage. But this was not the case during the time of the Natya Shastra or the Sanskrit theatre. Women could perform on stage. Remember the story when Natya Shastra, when Bharata Muni was using the Natya Shastra to perform, and he had a problem, he didn't have any female actors. So he went to Brahma and said, well, I don't have female characters or female actors to perform. So then Brahma created those nymphs, those apsaras, who acted in Bharata Muni's plays. Okay, so that's one very important feature as suggested by Natya Shastra. Now the actors or the male performers were mostly hired to perform more of the recitation-oriented performances. That means, dialogues, speaking dialogues and stuff like that. Whereas women did that too, but they would do more of the song and dance sequences too. Okay, that's was kind of a division. That means the women actors also were required to have the skills to sing and dance. Okay, that's why Natya Shastra devotes a huge section on dance and music. It also says that the actor must be intelligent, should have beauty, should be handsome, have strength, and they should have the knowledge of time and tempo. That means they should know the rhythm. This is extremely important characteristic of an actor. So in theatre, timing is very, very important. One should know exactly when to enter, when to exit, when to react to somebody. Even the dialogues, when they talk about, they follow a certain cadence, and this should be followed. So an actor who doesn't have a sense of rhythm or a sense of timing is of no use. Okay? They should be able to appreciate emotions and sentiments, rasa and bhava. We'll talk about that, very important aspect. So rasa and bhava, they should practice the bhavas and the rasas as a part of their acting skill. They should be able to understand and perform music. Okay, so that's a requirement, but as I said, female actors must have the knowledge to dance. Now, as per the Natya Shastra, I found it talks about a very important thing. It says that the actor is supposed to think of the character as if I am he or she, as if a soul transfer has happened. So if I am acting in the role of, let's say, a king, Harshavardhana, then I should think that King Harshavardhana's soul has transferred into me. This is an essence of acting, and all the acting schools, even till the modern days, try to achieve that in many different ways. You call it method acting, you call it whatever acting techniques you talk about, but this is what essentially happens in some form or other, and Natya Shastra rightfully points that out. Okay. Now, Natya Shastra talks about two types of acting. One is called the Lokadharmi acting, okay, which is essentially a realistic, natural acting. And it also talks about Natya Dharmi acting. Natya Dharmi is more like a conventional style, like a, more dramatic. And it says that acting constitutes of bodily movement, voice, spectacle, and then sentiments and emotions. So bodily movement, or also known as the Angika, has been discussed in details in the Natya Shastra. Okay, and you will see them performed in various kinds of through gestures, through mudras and things like that. Even the dancers, like the Kutiyattam dancers, or the even the Bharatanatyam, which is essentially now transformed into a dance form. There are many different mudras and gestures they perform to express their emotions or to convey their feelings. The problem is, in the Natya Shastra, there are no diagrams, there are no illustrations, no drawings. So typically the teachers or the gurus, they study the, essentially the text and interpret from it. So there are variations in it. So that's why you'll find that, Kutiyattam is slightly different from another dance form. Okay, but I think mostly because of the interpretations of the Natya Shastra caused a lot of the differences. Now, voice acting, or the Vachika, has been mentioned, but not to that details in the Natya Shastra. In chapter 18 of the Natya Shastra, it discusses about vocal registers, about the intonations, about accents and things like that, but not too very detailed. Okay, again, without actual demonstration, it's very difficult. I mean, these art forms are very difficult to learn by just reading books. You need somebody to show you. That's why we have in our tradition this thing called Guru Shishya Parampara. So the Guru must teach the students. That's why Brahma gave Bharata Muni the Natya Veda and told him, teach your students how to do it. Okay? Spectacle, or aharya, is something like gorgeousness that an acting should show, and that comes typically through costume, jewelry, headset dresses, makeup. Okay, the more gorgeous you look, that's what kind of the spectacle is part, as mentioned in the Natya Shastra, to pretty detailed as to how you should take your makeup, what kind of jewelry you should wear, things like that. And then the sentiments of the emotions, the rasa and the bhava. We'll talk about it in details very soon. Natya Shastra also talks about bad acting. We often go watch a movie or a theater or a play and we say, that guy was horrible. Or that actor was superb. I really loved his acting. Now, how do you say which acting is good and which acting is bad? Natya Shastra says that bad acting is caused due to few things. One is unnaturalness. That means if the actor does something which is not natural, which doesn't strike right to you, it's not good acting. incorrect movement. You'll see amateur actors moving sideways or moving in awkward directions. That's not good acting. It clearly straight away says that this guy is an amateur, right? And he's not a real actor. Unsuitability in a role. Some people, they want to be the hero, or somebody wants to act in a particular character, and the director succumbed to it, pressure, and hired him in that role or casted him in that role, and obviously that doesn't look right. So that's also bad acting. Forgetfulness. You have to remember the lines. Come on. If you don't remember the lines, how are you going to say, if you go on stage and forget the lines? People will throw tomatoes at you. So be careful, memorize the lines, and that's what Natya Shastra talks about. Forgetfulness. Improper use of gestures. Now, Natya Shastra is very, very methodical and very pointedly talks about different gestures. And if you improperly say, let's say a gesture like this means something, but you performed something else in order to do that, that's not good acting. Okay? Improper projection of voice. Projection of voice is extremely, extremely important even today. Even with all the help of microphones or fantastic acoustic designs and all, ultimately an actor must make his voice heard to the last row of audience sitting. And that requires training. That requires special capabilities of projecting one's voice. Needs special training and learning. So that's also mentioned in the Natya Shastra. Natya Shastra also mentions about, defect in rhythm and execution. We talked about it earlier. Defect in costumes and ornaments. You wear a costume which doesn't fit you, or you wear a, improper ornament, you proper a headdress of somebody who you're not supposed to wear, things like that. Or sometimes what we call overacting, excessive weeping, excessive crying. That throws off people. You sometimes some actors try to impress by, if I'm crying, come on, let me cry a lot. And they cry a lot and people get turned off. So Natya Shastra says that's bad acting. So think about it. A manual on theater written thousands of years ago goes into such details about various aspects of theater, of acting, of drama, of play. This is something you can find anywhere. Now, Natya Shastra, of course, talks a lot about dance and music. Okay, many of the modern the dance forms, what we call the classical dance forms, have evolved, and even the music have evolved from Natya Shastra. Okay, so, but as far as the theater context is concerned, in the plays, songs were performed throughout the play, but although Sanskrit theater was mostly dialogue based, but typically to introduce a character in the play, songs were used. When a character exits, song is used. To change the mood of a scene, suddenly the mood of the scene changes. A song, people break into a song and dance. To fill in the gaps between the scenes, something has happened, a mishap, or a character is not entering. Boom, the dancers come in and a song and dance happens. Remember, even today in our Bollywood movies, we see this, we carry on this tradition because that's kind of in our blood, in our DNA. We carry it through this Natya Shastra. Now let's talk about a very important contribution of Natya Shastra for the art of acting and performance, and that is the concept of bhava and rasa. Now, Natya Shastra essentially talks about four central themes, or themes rather. One is action, that means then there's a movement. It talks about dance. And then in chapter 6 and 7, it talks about rasa and bhava. That together are called the rasadhyaya. And researchers and scholars have spent a lot of time analyzing it, trying to explore it, try to understand it. Now, long before, I can't date it exactly, but the Greek scholar or the Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote a book called the Poetics, which also talks about different aspects of theater, of drama. Now, Aristotle's Poetics mainly talk about the dramatic structure, and it's not the same as Natya Shastra. It clearly focuses on how to write a play or how to tell a story that's going to make the most appeal to the audience, to one who sees that play, one who listens to that story. Even today, many screenwriters of Hollywood use Aristotle's Poetics as the main guide for the screenplays. Critics consciously or unconsciously use the Poetics as their metric to judge a particular theater or a performance or a cinema or whatever. Okay? In Aristotle's Poetics, he talks about three things. When he talks about pity, fear, and catharsis. He says that the audience, when he or she watches a play or a film performed in front of him, he should first feel pity for the protagonist, for the central character, because the protagonist falls into some kind of a crisis, something bad happens to it, or some challenge comes to him. Feels pity for the character, poor guy. And then as the play progresses, the audience starts to feel fear, because hey, things are turning out to be worse, maybe. And that fear is really creeps into the audience, because the audience through the actor sees himself or herself. Think about this movie Titanic, a great success, okay, in the all-time Hollywood movie success. When people see that this ship is sinking and this hero and the heroine is not finding a way to survive, they start to panic internally. Emotions built up, tensions built up. And finally, when the film or the play ends, suddenly a magic happens. They feel those emotions, tensions being all purged away, drained away. And they feel initially a bit numb, and then they feel fresh. And that's what is called as the catharsis. So that's what we call as the cathartic moment. That's how all modern Western plays, films are judged by. Natya Shastra goes even further, and we'll talk about it. Natya Shastra talks about two essential concepts related to emotions or the feelings. Now think about it. We have two parties. One is the actor who's performing the act, showing certain emotions, displaying certain emotions through actions or through dialogues or through gestures or whatever. And then the audience sitting in his chair back in the theater hall feels those emotions. So there are two different aspects. So Natya Shastra talks about rasa and talks about bhava. Rasa are the sentiments and feelings that arise when we experience art, when we see theater, when we listen to music, when we watch a nice dance performance. The feelings that generate inside us, the sentiments that generate inside us in our mind, our body, is what Natya Shastra calls as a rasa. So sometimes people think the other way, okay, and I will talk about it. And the other thing is bhava. Bhava is something that what the actor displays their bhava, which in turn evokes rasa in the audience. For example, an actor who plays the role of a poor man who's been beaten to death, feels very hungry, tortured. The people feel sad for him, feel pity for him. Karun Ras is invoked within the audience maybe. But the actor does not performing the same thing, he's performing something else. He's conscious about it and he tries to do something in order to evoke that emotion in the audience, and that's called the bhava. Okay? Whereas Aristotle Poetics talks about the pity, fear and catharsis that I talked about, right? Now bhavas are of different types. Okay? First of all, they are called sthayi bhavas, which are the basic mental states. We'll talk about that. Bhivavas, which are the determinants. I mean, it means a stimulus that gives rise to those emotions. Okay, for example, just I gave the example, right? You'll see a poor, hungry man lying and crying in the streets. We feel bad for him. So that raises that emotion. Or one character comes in and he sees that a hooligan or somebody is trying to molest a young girl. He suddenly feels empowered himself and suddenly feels angry and tries to go and save the girl. So some chivalry, okay, shows some shaurya or virras, and that audience also feels just by his action that he's going and running and punching that hooligan to rescue the damsel in distress, and the audience feels pumped up. Okay, anubhava are the consequence, like the voluntary gestures. Okay, for example, a child, a young toddler comes walking and the mother looks at the toddler and feels happy, so happy that he rushes in and grabs the child and hugs the child. That she goes and hugs the child is a physically gesture, it's a voluntary gesture. That gesture of hugging the child is called the anubhava. Okay? There is sattvika, which are like the involuntary physical responses. Crying, trembling, which typically, you cannot just act out. Or sweating, when you're scared, you're sweating. Things like that. Then there are vyavichari bhavas, or transient emotions, like weakness, joy, intoxication, which comes and then goes away. Okay, a bunch of, drunk men going, so the hero suddenly drinks something and gets drunk, and does something funny, raising possibly hasya rasa in the audience. But that's called the Vyavachari Bhava. Okay? Now, Sthayi Bhavas, as I said, are as prescribed in the Natya Shastra are of 8 types. The number 1 is called the Rati, or erotic love, passion. Okay. The second is Shoka, or grief. Krodha, anger. Utsaha, enthusiasm, energy. Bhaya, fear. Hasya, that's the Hasya Bhava. Jugupsa, disgust. Vishwaya, wonder. Wonder. And then there is a 9th one, which was added much later by Abhinav Gupta, and that's called Shant Rasa, or the peace. A sadhu sitting under a tree, or a child sleeping. Shanta Bhava. And each of these bhavas invoke rasa in the audience or the spectator. So, for example, Rati Bhav, erotic love, evokes Shringar in the audience. Hasya, the humor or comic, invokes same thing, hasya or laughter. Shoka or grief invokes karun ras, compassion, crying. Krodha or anger raises rudra ras. Okay, somebody is angry at you and I'm going to hit you, man. That's rudra ras. Utsaha, enthusiasm. Yay! Come on, let's go, do it. That's called utsaha, enthusiasm. And that's also, in the rasa, it's called the Veera rasa. Heroic, confidence, sacrifice for a greater cause. You know, that I talked about that young man trying to save the damsel in distress. Veera rasa. That's Jugupsa, disgust. Horrible. That's also called the Bibhatsa rasa. You know, some of the what we call a gross, macabre. These days, a lot of films have this, you know, blood and gore. It's really disgusting. And that's called the Bibhatsa ras. Vishmaya, wonder. Wow. That's also called the Adbhut ras. Adbhut ras is evoked in the spectator. And of course, the Shant ras, when done properly, when the Santa Bhava, when the actor performs a Santa Bhava, let's say it sees a monks walking through the stage, Buddhang Sharanang Gacchami, the audience sits and feels at peace in them. That's called the Shanta rasa. So these 9 rasas, okay, erotic love, hasya, karun, rudra, veera, bhayanak, or the fear, terrible, bibhatsa, and adbhut, and shant. These are the 9 rasas. But this is a unique contribution of Natya Shastra to the theatre world. Now, talking about other stuff, for example, stagecraft, props, and costume, I'll just touch upon them because we have already spent quite a bit of time, so I'll not delve into with them a lot. Stagecraft, typically Natyashastra talks about how to build like sets and sceneries, mountains, buildings using bamboo frames with cloth and paint and stuff like that. It talks about using curtains or yavanika. We talked about yavanika last time. Some people think that yavanika word came from the Greeks or the Yavans. So curtains or yavanikas were used to cover part of the stage or the full stage, just to hide the actors for the proper entrance or entrance time. Okay, or part of the stage is covered and then it's moved away so the actors can come in. Okay. Attention given to ornaments and jewelry and how to wear them. They're typically made of light material, how to build them. Natyashastra talks about them. It suggests the use of animals too, but it's not exactly clear that whether they are suggesting real live animals or maybe, some actors posing as animals and or some cutouts or whatever. But use of animals on stage has been mentioned in the Natyashastra. Another important thing which hardly any other theatre manual will talk about. It also talks about the audience and the critics. For example, Natyashastra says that the audience can be of any caste. After all, the fifth Veda was created to serve all the castes, not only the Brahmins, like the other four Vedas are. So all castes were allowed to come and watch the play, but an ideal spectator is one who's learned, knowledgeable, of high birth or noble birth, should be quiet, composed, and one who loves to appreciate art. That should be the ideal spectator. It also talks about different kinds of reactions, how an audience should react to a play. For example, if it's a divine play happening, one should not laugh out loud or things like that. They should maybe either stay quiet or just smile a little. That's all. Okay, so it goes to that level of details. It talks about the critics. It says the critics should be knowledgeable person, preferably Brahmins or artists or kings maybe. Okay, and they should judge the actors and then give them prizes or awards if they win them. So, in summary, Natyashastra talks about each and every detailed aspect of a theatrical performance, or what we call a theatrical performance these days. In fact, it extends to any performing arts. You will see Bharatanatyam dancers or even Kathak dancers performing the Navarasa. Okay, you will see these even actors practicing the Navarasas through the facial expressions, just as an exercise for training. Even the modern day actors. You go to any theatre school or go for a theatre class in any university, these are the things you will be taught in more details. So Natyashastra is a fundamental text which defines Indian theatre. And I'm glad that you all listened to this. I hope you liked it, and I encourage you to explore this topic more and learn more about it, and I'm telling you, you'll not be disappointed. In the next episode, we'll talk about Sanskrit theatre, about the Sanskrit playwrights and how they were performed and things like that. Till then, goodbye, thank you, namaskar.